The late-day sun baked the dusty street of Willow Creek, casting everything in shades of fire and rust. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It was 1882, and the little frontier town looked like a scar across the Arizona territory, where wilderness and civilization rubbed raw against each other. Whirlwinds of dirt spun between the buildings, and the heat shimmered so hard it drove even the toughest folks into the shadows. Grant Callahan stood on the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low, shadowing eyes that had seen far too much hardship. At 35, he was tall and broad-shouldered, his strength honed by years under a brutal sun. His face was weathered, carved with the lines of solitude giving away nothing as he watched the scene unfolding on the crude auction stand. The townsfolk pressed close, buzzing with excitement, disgust, and morbid curiosity. Men spat tobacco into the dust, while women in calico whispered behind gloved hands, all eyes fixed on the figure chained at the center of it all. Ruby Dalton stood bound at the wrists, though Grant doubted any iron could hold the fire in those amber eyes. She couldn't have been more than 23 with wild auburn hair that caught the fading sunlight like strands of copper. Her dress, once white, was torn and dirt-stained, smeared with blood at the mouth, and bruises blooming along her arms. Yet she stood straight, chin-lifted gaze, fierce enough to burn a hole through the crowd. "Gentleman," drawled Cyrus Boone, the greasy auctioneer, waving his gavel with flair, "what we've got here is a true wild thing. Lived like an animal in the canyons, thieving, clawing, fighting like the devil himself when cornered. Took the sheriff's boys a hell of a time to drag her in." The crowd laughed and jeered. "What's her name?" someone hollered. "Calls herself Ruby," Boone smirked. "Lord knows if that's Christian or heathen. Talks when she wants to fight's like 10 men when riled. County's done with her. Whoever takes her on, it's at their own risk." Grant's jaw flexed. Ruby turned her head slowly, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces like a cornered wolf. When her eyes locked on his, something sparked, lightning quick, sharp as a blade. Recognition. Challenge. He couldn't tell, but his boots moved him closer before he'd even thought about it. Boone dabbed sweat from his brow. "Sometimes the wildest mares make the best stock once you break 'em proper. I ain't no horse," Ruby snapped, her voice cutting the air like a whip. "And I'll kill the man who tries to break me." The crowd recoiled. Some laughed nervously, others muttered in disapproval. A woman clutched her husband's arm, whispering, "No Christian lady talks like that. That's why she needs a strong hand." Another man chuckled, eyes glinting ugly. $20, someone shouted. 25 to 30. Each bid came with crude comments about taming her. Grant stood motionless, his expression hard as stone, though inside his stomach turned. He hadn't come here for this, but something in Ruby's defiant dignity kept him rooted. 40 Barrett Kane bellowed, shoving his way forward, his heavy frame reeking of whiskey and sweat. "She'll do fine on my spread. Always got room for a spirited filly." The crowd roared with laughter at his crude joke. Ruby spat at him, earning a vicious backhand from a deputy. She stumbled, lip split anew, but refused to fall. Now, Boone chuckled, enjoying the spectacle. "Let's keep it civil. Do I hear 45 Grant's boots carried him forward. Spurs rang as he climbed onto the platform. Up close he saw the fear buried under Ruby's defiance, the exhaustion in her stance. 100, he said, his voice low but carrying clear in the sudden hush. Boone gaped. 100, Grant repeated, pulling a leather pouch from his coat. Cash. End this now. Barrett shoved forward, face red. "Hold on a damn minute!" Grant turned slowly, steel-gray eyes locking onto him. His hand rested easy near his Colt .45, a stance that made men twice Barrett's size back down. "Unless you plan to bid higher, it's finished." The crowd held its breath. Barrett's hand twitched near his gun, but one look at Grant's calm readiness made him think better of it. He spat into the dirt. "She's yours. No man alive can tame her anyway. You'll see." Grant laid the bills out one by one. Boone snatched them up greedily. Someone called out from the crowd, "What are you planning to do with her?" "Callahan, your place ain't fit for a woman." Grant finally turned to the crowd. "What I do is my business." Then, in a voice meant for Ruby alone, he muttered, "Let's see if you'll ride straight into my heart." The words, half challenge, half mockery of the spectacle made Ruby's eyes widen. She searched his face for cruelty, and instead found a quiet resolve. "Unlock her," Grant ordered. The deputy hesitated. "You sure Callahan she'll bolt first chance she gets?" "Unlock her," Grant repeated. The chains clattered to the ground. Ruby rubbed her raw wrist's eyes, never leaving the man who had just turned her fate on its head. The chains fell to the ground with a hard clank. Ruby Dalton rubbed her raw wrists, but never broke her stare from Grant Callahan. The crowd leaned in hungry for a spectacle, expecting her to lash out or run. She stayed rooted still, as a doe weighing whether to flee or fight. "You bought nothing," she rasped, voice torn but unbroken. "I don't belong to any man." "Never said you did," Grant answered evenly, "but the law says different, and right now the only way out of this mess is with me. You want to walk free, or do I leave you to them?" He tipped his head toward Barrett Kane and the other vultures circling the edges. Ruby's jaw clenched, pride and survival waging war across her face. At last she gave a quick nod. "I'll go, but I won't kneel, not to you, not to anyone." "Never asked you to," Grant muttered, already turning. "Wagons are this way." The crowd grudgingly gave them room as they descended. Grant heard the low hiss of whispers, a sour mix of pity, judgment, and envy. Ruby walked beside him, not behind chin high, though her wrists still bore red grooves from the shackles. At his wagon piled with supplies, Grant paused. "Can you ride better than any man here?" Ruby shot back, sparks in her tone. "Good. There's a mare tied to the back. Yours." Her eyes flickered with surprise, and he added, "Long ride ahead. Be easier if you're mounted." As she swung toward the horse, an old woman, Martha Finch, called from the crowd, "You're making a mistake, Callahan. Wildness like that can't be loved out of a person." Grant mounted redemption, his solid black gelding. "Ain't trying to love it out," he called back. "Maybe it don't need to come out at all." Ruby mounted the mare with practiced ease, and for an instant Grant glimpsed her, as she might have been untamed free under the open sky. But the image faded, and they were just two scarred souls on a street that would gossip about them for years. They rode out as the sun dropped sky, bleeding red and gold. Their shadows stretched long across the road, two riders heading toward an unknown horizon. Behind them, the town shrank into dusk, its judgment fading with the light. Ruby kept her silence riding even with him, her quiet heavier than the chains she'd worn. Grant didn't press. He hadn't bought her trust, just her freedom, and he knew well enough that trust couldn't be bought at any price. The road stretched ahead, unforgiving. The land waiting for them wasn't paradise, just another patch of hard soil under a harder sky. But it was a start, and out here a beginning was more than most ever got. Hours passed beneath the moon's silver glow. Hooves beat a steady rhythm, coyotes howled far off. Ruby moved in perfect rhythm with her mare, despite her weariness. Grant studied her from the corner of his eye. She scanned the horizon like a hawk, shoulders taut, never at ease. She reminded him of a Mustang he'd once roped, beautiful, unbroken, and likely to bolt if given the chance. "We'll camp soon," he said, voice gravelly from the long silence. She didn't answer, eyes fixed ahead. Grant let it be. Some silences meant more than words, especially for someone who'd been burned by too many lies. They reached a grove of cottonwoods sheltering a spring. Grant dismounted stiffly. "Safe ground here. Water's good trees give cover. We'll rest tonight." "And if I keep riding?" she challenged, testing him. He shrugged, tending redemption. "Mare's tired even if you ain't. Push her in this country, you'll both end up buzzard bones. Your choice." He turned his back, deliberately gathering wood. "A risk, but sometimes the only way to prove you meant no harm was to show your back." He heard her boots hit the sand. "Just for tonight," she muttered. Grant built a fire, laid out 2 bedrolls opposite each other, rifle within reach. He dug jerky and a can of peaches from his saddlebags. Ruby cared for her mare with surprising tenderness, rubbing her down, checking her hooves. When done, she drifted to the fire like a wild thing drawn by warmth, but wary of the trap. Hunger, Grant asked, offering food without looking up. She snatched it, retreating to her side of the flames, eating like someone who'd known real hunger. Grant chewed slow eyes on the fire. Then Ruby's voice broke the night, sharp with need. "Why? Why did you buy me?" "What do you want?" Grant thought long before answering. Couldn't stomach watching anymore. Grant Callahan finally spoke, his voice low. "What they aimed to do to you, what they would have done, I couldn't stomach it. As for what I want..." His gaze met Ruby Dalton's across the fire. "Right now I want to get back to Ironwood Ranch. After that we'll see. Everyone wants something," she muttered bitterly. "Men especially." "True enough," Grant allowed. "I want hands that'll work the cattle. I want to bring my herd in before the cold sets in. I want one night of sleep without ghosts shaking me awake. But none of that means taking anything from you don't give." Ruby studied him, searching for the lie. Firelight softened the edges of her worn, bruised face. "And if I run, then you run," Grant said simply. "I won't chase, but I'd ask you to think on where you'd be running. That desert don't care about freedom. It'll kill you quicker than any man." A cold wind licked through camp, making the flames leap. Ruby pulled the thin blanket tighter. Grant noticed her shiver and tossed more wood on the fire without comment. "Your ranch," she said at last. "What's it like?" "Hard ground," he admitted. 300 acres of scrub and stone. Enough grass if you know where to look. I've got Luke Harlow, old Diego Cortez, and young Owen Briggs. Good men. They keep their own counsel, and they'll expect me to..." She didn't finish, but the weight of it hung. "They'll expect you to work," Grant said flatly. "Same as everyone. Nothing more. Any man thinks different, he answers to me." Ruby's expression shifted, unreadable. Then, softer than a whisper, "I've never had a real home." The words seemed to surprise even her. Grant poked the fire, waiting. She continued, her voice steadier now. "They called me wild, like I was an animal. But I wasn't always. I know this land, every canyon, every spring, every place to hide when storms rolled in. That's how I lived after..." She broke off. "They caught me taking food. I was hungry. That's all." "No shame in hunger," Grant said quietly. "They made it shameful," she shot back. "Made me shameful. Wild girl, untamed. Like freedom made me less than human." Coyotes howled one after another until the night filled with their mournful chorus. Ruby tilted her head, listening as though she understood. "You get them," Grant said. She shot him a sharp look, expecting mockery, but found none. Slowly, she nodded. "Sometimes better than I get people." Silence fell again, no longer hostile, but uncertain. Grant banked the fire, then rose, stretching stiff muscles. "I'll keep first watch. Long ride tomorrow." Ruby's hand twitched for a weapon she didn't have. "You're not going to..." "I'm going to sit under that cottonwood, keep varmints off us. Same as I do every night on the trail." Grant cut her off. "Your bedroll's there. Use it or don't, but rest. You'll need it." He settled under the tree rifle across his knees, giving her the whole camp. Ruby stared long, torn between suspicion and exhaustion. Finally, weariness won. She curled on the bedroll, never fully relaxed, even as her eyes slid shut. Grant kept his vigil as stars wheeled overhead. His thoughts spun, as scattered as those cold lights. He'd acted on instinct in town disgust he couldn't quite name, and recognition he didn't dare examine. Now, he had to get a wounded, dangerous spirit across hard country to a place that might not be any kinder than the world she'd fled. Near dawn, he heard her stir. She'd cried out in her sleep, fighting shadows, then settled again. Now she bolted upright, eyes wild, until she remembered where she was. "Bad dreams?" he asked quietly. She hugged her knees, nodding. "Always. Sun'll be up soon. Best to move with the morning cool." As if summoned, the horizon blushed pale, painting the desert in soft hues. Ruby rose, shook dust from her dress, and readied her mare without prompting. They broke camp, quickly moving in near silence that felt almost companionable. While tightening his bedroll, Grant heard her voice. "That thing you said in town, about me riding into your heart. Did you mean it?" She kept her eyes on her stirrups. "Meant it as a jab at their foolishness," he admitted. Then, after a pause, "But maybe there was truth in it too." "Time'll tell?" Ruby swung into her saddle, face unreadable in the rising light. "I still might run. I know Grant said mounting redemption, but you're here now. That's something." They rode out as the sun crested, stretching their shadows across the waking desert. Ahead lay miles of rough country and a future neither could name. But for now, they rode side by side, two battered souls caught somewhere between captivity and freedom, mistrust, and the faintest flicker of hope. The ranch was still 2 days off, and Grant Callahan knew the real test wouldn't come until Ruby Dalton crossed its threshold. Yet riding alongside her, now straight-backed and sharp-eyed, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, stubborn as desert flowers, forcing life from stone. The sun climbed high as they pressed onward into whatever fate lay waiting. When Ironwood Ranch finally spread across the valley below, it looked less like a home and more like a monument to grit. Weathered buildings crouched low against the wide Arizona sky, as if bracing against the winds of time. Cresting the ridge, Grant felt the same mix of pride and weariness that always came with seeing it again. Beside him, Ruby stiffened in the saddle, her gaze sharp, weighing whether this place would be a prison or a refuge. "There it is," Grant said, though the sight needed no introduction. The main house stood solid, built of rough-hewn timber and stone-bleached silver with age. A great barn anchored the east end corrals, stretched out like wooden ribs, and a bunkhouse, smokehouse, and sheds completed the spread. It wasn't grand, but it was real, carved out of merciless land, through nothing but sweat and stubbornness. "Looks like Luke's bringing in the horses," Grant noted, watching the dust rise from the far corral. Ruby said nothing, though her knuckles whitened around the reins. As they rode down, 3 men appeared, drawn by the sound of hooves. Luke Harlow was first, broad and steady, his gray beard streaking a face lined by decades of sun. He touched his hat. "Boss, weren't expecting you back with company." "Luke." "This is Ruby Grant," said firmly. "She'll be staying, working like the rest of us." His tone left no room for questions. Luke nodded once. "Ma'am?" Ruby didn't answer, her eyes darting toward the 2 others approaching. Diego Cortez, wiry and near 70, carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd outlived violence by making himself indispensable. Owen Briggs, no more than 18, stared with the hungry curiosity of youth. "Billy, stop gawking and take the horses," Luke barked, calling the boy by habit. "Diego, that south fence still needs mending." "Si, jefe." Diego replied, his dark eyes meeting Ruby's with something like understanding. "Bienvenida, señorita." Grant swung down from redemption. Ruby stayed mounted until the others had drifted back to their tasks. Only then did she dismount, keeping her mare between herself and the ranch like a shield. "Come on," Grant said. "I'll show you your room, not the main house." Her words carried a challenge. "There's a room off the kitchen. Has its own door to the outside. Figured you'd want that." He led her inside. The house was plain, but clean masculine in its order. A big iron stove anchored the kitchen, and a long table scarred by years of meals told the story of hard living. Grant opened a small side door. "Used to be storage. Put a cot in here, hooks for your things. Window looks toward the mountains." And this he held out a key locks from the inside. Ruby stepped in, studying the tiny room, narrow bed, small trunk, a window cut to frame the distant peaks, and that extra door leading out. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe gratitude, but she smothered it. "What's expected of me?" she asked. "Work," Grant said flatly. "Same as anyone. Cookin', mending, cattle work when needed. It ain't easy, but it's honest. Luke will show you what you don't know. And if I refuse, then you go hungry. Out here we all work or none of us eat. Simple as that." In the days that followed, Ruby pushed every boundary like water prying at stone. Her first morning she skipped breakfast, found instead by the well watching the sunrise. "Meals are 6 noon and 6, Grant said, handing her coffee. "Miss one, you wait till the next." "I'm not hungry," she muttered. "Suit yourself." He turned away, then added over his shoulder, "Pride makes a poor meal. Nothing wrong with sitting at the table with honest men." By midday she appeared in the kitchen, slipping onto the bench as far from the others as possible. Luke and the hands treated her presence as ordinary, just another body at the table. Owen tried once to strike up a conversation, but shut his mouth fast under Luke's sharp glare. The real battle came with work. When Luke asked her to help with laundry, Ruby froze, fists tightening at her sides. I don't know how Ruby Dalton admitted through clenched teeth. "No shame in not knowin'," Luke Harlow replied calmly. "Here, I'll show you." The grizzled foreman bent over the washboard, his big hands moving with patient certainty. Watching him demonstrate with quiet ease, Ruby's walls cracked just enough for her to lean in and copy his motions. She attacked the chore with fierce determination, as if proving herself on that simple task was a matter of survival. Cooking, however, became the next battle. On the second night, when Grant Callahan suggested she help Diego Cortez with supper, she bristled. "I won't be a servant," she snapped. "And you won't be served," Grant answered evenly. "We take turns. Tonight's yours." I said no. The room went still, tension stretched tight as a drawn bow. The ranch hands shifted uncomfortably. Owen Briggs squirmed while Luke and Diego waited to see what their boss would do. Grant rose slowly. "Then we all go hungry tonight. No one cooks, no one eats." He glanced at his men. "Sorry, boys. Maybe tomorrow." Shock flashed across Ruby's face. "You can't." "I can." Grant said, dropping into his chair and opening the newspaper like he had all night to wait. Owen's stomach growled loud enough to echo. Luke sighed, pulling out his pipe, while Diego closed his eyes as though settling into a nap. 20 minutes dragged by, the only sound the ticking clock and Owen's empty gut. Finally, Ruby slammed her hands on the table. "Fine." She stormed to the stove. "But I don't know how to cook either." "I will help, Señorita," Diego said gently. "No shame. My Maria taught me long ago, cooking it is like taming fire. You must be patient, but firm." Something in his quiet manner eased Ruby's resistance. Together they cobbled together a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread. When she slammed the plates down with unnecessary force, Grant simply said, "Thank you," and started eating. The first real crisis struck days later when a sandstorm rolled in without warning. Ruby had been in the south pasture learning fence repair from Luke when the wall of dust swallowed the land. Panicked, she tore away from Luke's guiding hand, running blind. Grant found her an hour later crouched against a rock face, skin raw from the sand. Without a word, he wrapped his coat around her shoulders and half-carried her back to the house. "Foolish girl," Luke exploded once they were safe. "You could have died out there." "I didn't ask for help." Ruby shot back, still trembling. "No," Grant said quietly, easing her into a chair. "But you needed it. Nothing shameful in that." As he cleaned the grit from her face with surprising gentleness, Ruby finally broke. "I thought I knew this land," she whispered. "But I don't know anything." "You know how to survive alone," Grant said. "Now you're learning how to survive with others. Different skill, that's all." The turning point came with the horses. Owen was bungling his way through breaking a young Mustang, his impatience making the colt wild with fear. Ruby, watching from the fence, couldn't take it anymore. "You're doing it wrong," she called. Owen flushed. "Like you could do better." Without another word, Ruby vaulted the fence. She approached the trembling horse, slowly murmuring low sounds that seemed almost another language. Within minutes, the colt stood still, letting her stroke its neck. "How did you?" Owen started. "You have to listen," Ruby said softly, transformed by the moment. "He's scared, not mean. Fear makes everything wild." From the barn, Grant watched her realize her own words. Their eyes met across the corral, and no words were needed. Understanding passed between them like a quiet flame. After that day, Ruby threw herself into the work with relentless energy. Diego taught her to cook. Luke showed her to mend, and all of them shared the cattle chores. Her hands blistered and bled, but she never complained. At night, Grant often found her slumped over the ranch ledgers trying to make sense of numbers by lamplight. "You don't have to prove anything," he told her one evening, watching her wrestle with a harness. "Yes, I do," she said fiercely. "To myself, if no one else." Slowly, Ironwood Ranch began to accept her as she accepted it. Luke left her tasks without supervision. Diego whispered Spanish curses that made Owen blush. Even the horses seemed to welcome her nickering when she entered the barn. But Grant knew something had shifted for good the night Ruby sat at the main table beside him instead of across. She was still wild, and always would be, but now her fire had a place where it wasn't caged. "Thank you," she murmured as they cleared dishes together. "For what he asked. For giving me work instead of walls." Grant paused, hands deep in suds. "Everyone needs something to build," he said at last. "Otherwise, we're just surviving." Ruby dried the plate with steady hands. Outside, a coyote's call split the night. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't look toward the sound with longing. She already belonged. That evening felt ordinary, the hands gathered around the table after a long day's work. Ruby had made stew this time, simple hearty, and the men ate with quiet gratitude. It was Diego Cortez who first cracked the silence, his voice rough with memory. "My youngest grandson. He'd be about your age now, Señorita Ruby. Fever took him before his time." The table went quiet. Diego rarely spoke of family, never of loss. Ruby's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said softly, and meant every word. Diego nodded, his lined face calm. "Long years gone, but sometimes when I see you working so hard, fighting so fierce, I remember him. He had that same fire." All I've ever had is fire, Ruby muttered, startled she'd spoken aloud. Luke Harlow cleared his throat. Nothing wrong with fire. Kept most of us alive on the trail. Miss Ruby, if you don't mind me asking? Owen Briggs started. Boy, Luke snapped. But Ruby raised her hand. It's all right. She pushed her stew around words, scattering like loose seeds. I wasn't born wild. I had a family once, a little farm near the Colorado border. Grant Callahan watched her from the head of the table, saying nothing. He'd learned her truths came easier when left alone. I was 12 when those raiders came. Ruby continued, her voice flat. Comancheros. Took whatever they could steal. Or sell. My parents tried to fight. They didn't win. The kitchen grew still, only the wind tapping against the windows. Her amber eyes were fixed far away, seeing ghosts no one else could banish. They dragged me off, sold me to a trading post up north. The man there. She stopped, knuckles whitening around her spoon. I lasted 3 years. Then I stole a horse, grabbed what I could and ran. Learned to live like coyotes and hawks. Free. Jesus. Owen breathed, then flushed under Luke's glare. 7 years, Ruby said bitterly. 7 years I lived by my own hands, stealing, hiding. They called me wild because I wouldn't crawl back to their world. Why would I? What had it ever given me but pain? Grant finally spoke, his voice low. Takes grit to survive alone that long. Wasn't grit, Ruby shot back. It was fear. Fear of walls. Of men. Of being owned again. I'd sooner die free than live chained. Yet here you are, Diego said gently. Ruby's gaze swept the kitchen. The men who'd started to feel like something close to family, the walls that sheltered instead of confined, and Grant, who'd offered work instead of shackles. Here I am, she whispered, almost surprised. The silence stretched until Luke, uneasy with raw truths, steered the talk toward tomorrow's chores. But something had shifted. Something unspoken. Later, when the others retired to the bunkhouse, Grant found Ruby on the porch, staring at the star-drenched sky. Thank you, he said quietly, stepping beside her. For trusting us with that. You bought damaged goods? She answered, her tone too light. Figured you ought to know what you paid for. I didn't buy anything, Grant said firmly. I made that clear from the start. Ruby studied him in the moonlight. Your turn then? What ghosts keep you out here? Grant Callahan. What drives a man to live this hard, this alone? For a long time, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, the words came slow, like pulling barbs from old wounds. Had a wife once. Mary. Prettiest girl in Missouri, and for some reason she chose me. We came west full of dreams. Planned to raise a family, build something that'd last. He paused. Eyes clouded with memories, sharp as broken glass. Ruby waited patient as he'd been with her. Apache raid winter of '76, he said at last. I was in town too long, waitin' on a shipment. Came back to find her in the yard. She fought Mary always fought, but one woman against a war party. His voice broke off, dead as ash. Buried her under the cottonwood she loved. Couldn't stay there. Sold the land, came here. Figured if I worked hard enough, the hurt might fade. It doesn't. His steel-gray eyes met hers, carrying the same pain she knew in her own bones. It just becomes part of you, like scar tissue. You learn to work around it. Is that why you stopped them from selling me? Ruby asked. Because of her. Maybe part of it, Grant admitted. Couldn't stomach seeing another woman treated like stock. But mostly... He hesitated. Mostly I saw the same look I see in the mirror. Someone who's lost everything but still refuses to bow. They stood in silence, bound by an understanding deeper than words. The night wind carried sage and distant rain. A nighthawk cried somewhere in the dark. I dream about them, Ruby said suddenly. My parents, calling to me, but I can never reach them. Wake up trying to answer, but my voice won't come. I dream Mary's still alive, Grant confessed. Wake up reaching for her. Feels like a fresh wound every time. Ruby touched his arm, then just a fleeting contact, but real. Maybe that's why fate brought me here. Two broken people might make one whole. Not broken, Grant corrected, covering her hand with his. Tempered, like steel in the forge, stronger for the fire. Warmth spread between them, not yet desire, but something steadier. Recognition. Respect. Two scarred souls who'd survived the flames and found in each other the proof they weren't alone. I should tell you, Ruby Dalton said, stepping back, but not running. There are still nights I think about bolting, when the walls feel too close or the memories cut too deep. I know, Grant Callahan answered simply. Doors always open, but I hope you'll choose to stay. I'm trying, she whispered, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Every day I'm trying. As if fate wanted to seal her words, a shooting star ripped across the heavens. Ruby gasped. For all her years living wild, the wonder of it never left her. Make a wish, Grant murmured. Don't believe in wishes, she said, but her eyes followed that streak of fire with something close to hope. Neither do I, he admitted. But maybe that's what makes 'em worth making. Ruby laughed, then a sound rare as rain in the desert. You're a contradiction, Grant Callahan. Iron one moment, soft as poetry the next. A man's got to be both if he's gonna last out here, he said. Hard enough to endure, soft enough to stay human. Is that what we are? She asked quietly. Still human. After all of it, most human when we're tested, Grant said with conviction. Easy to act civilized when life's gentle. Takes real humanity to choose kindness when the world's shown you nothing but cruelty. They sat long into the night, trading smaller stories. Ruby told of her first hunt, the winter she sheltered with wolves. Grant told of a lost corn crop, the spring he pulled a calf alone. With each tale, another wall between them crumbled. At last, Ruby rose, yawning. Thank you, she said softly, for listening. And thank you, Grant replied, for trusting me enough to share it. Her hand lingered on the door latch. Grant, what I said before about two broken people making one whole, I knew what you meant, he assured her. And I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. Maybe you never will be ready. That's all right, too. Her smile then was unguarded, transforming her face from striking to breathtaking. Good night, Grant. Good night, Ruby. When her door closed, Grant stayed on the porch, not quite at peace, but closer than he'd been in years. Inside, Ruby sat on her narrow bed, fingers brushing the place on her arm where his hand had rested. The warmth lingered. Neither slept easy, but for once their wakefulness wasn't haunted by the past. Instead, they thought of shared stories, shooting stars, and the strange comfort of being seen. The Ironwood Ranch lay hushed under the Arizona sky, sheltering two hearts, learning slowly to heal. Then the thunder came, hooves pounding in the pre-dawn dark, rattling windows, snapping men awake. Grant was on his feet, rifle in hand, before thought had caught up. Through his window he saw riders cresting the rise, torches flaring like a line of fire ants in the night. Too many to count. Boss Luke Harlow's voice bellowed from the yard. We got company. Grant yanked on his boots, pulled his coat tight, and checked the Colt .45 at his side. He stepped onto the porch, just as Ruby burst from her room fully dressed, a kitchen knife clutched white-knuckled. Their eyes locked, sharing one unspoken message. Danger was here. Inside, Grant ordered. Ruby shook her head, planting herself at his side. The riders stormed into the yard, 15 men, strong faces half-lit, half-shadowed. At their head rode Troy Maddox, younger brother to Barrett Kane. Meaner than Barrett and twice as cunning, Grant recognized others drifters' ranch hands from neighboring outfits, and at least 2 faces he'd seen on wanted posters. Morning Callahan Troy drawled his voice slick as a snake. "Fine day for a visit, wouldn't you say?" Luke Diego Cortez and young Owen Briggs took their places around the yard, guns visible, but not raised. The tension was thick enough to choke on. "State your business," Maddox Grant said evenly, though his hand never left the grip of his pistol. Troy swung down slow, deliberate, his men spreading into a half circle. "We're here about stolen property. Heard tell your harbor and something don't rightly belong. Everything on this ranch is bought and paid for," Grant shot back. "That so?" Troy sneered. "Even that wild filly hiding behind you. Heard she's been robbin', fightin', livin' like a savage." Ruby stepped forward, her voice cutting the air like a whip. "I won't be anyone's prize." Troy's eyes lit with cruel delight. "There she is. Boy's the infamous wild girl. Pretty thing. Shame to waste her on ranch chores when she could be entertaining company." Grant's blood iced over. "Get off my land, Maddox. Now!" Or what Troy spread his hands wide, mocking. "We're 15 men. You've got 1 old Mexican, a green kid, 1 worn-out foreman, and a girl with a knife. Not much of a fight." "You forgot one thing," Ruby said, her voice steady as stone. "I won't let you take me alive." She moved, then quick as lightning sliding between the riders and the house. The knife in her hand glinted mean in the torchlight. Her stance screamed she knew how to use it. Feisty one outlaw snorted. "I like 'em that way, makes breaking 'em sweeter." His laugh died when Ruby's knife thudded into the post beside his head. "Next one goes in flesh," she promised. "Enough!" Grant barked, stepping forward, his presence swelling to fill the yard. "Maddox, you and your men are trespassing. 1 chance to leave peaceable." "Can't do that, Callahan." Troy's smirk vanished. "That girl shamed my brother in town, made the Kane name a joke. We came to collect what's ours and give her the lesson she needs." "She's not yours," Grant said, each word heavy as an anvil. "She ain't anyone's. She works this ranch as a free woman. Any man says different answers to me?" "Big talk for one man," Troy sneered. "2, Luke said, stepping forward, rifle steady. 3, Diego added his buffalo gun, solid in his grip. 4, Owen croaked, his hands shaking, but his aim true. 5, Ruby said, retrieving her blade. "And I'll take 3 of you down before I fall." The air snapped taut as a drawn bow. Grant could see Troy weighing it, 15 men against 5, but 5 ready to kill or die. The outlaws shifted in their saddles, no longer so sure of themselves. "This ain't over," Troy Maddox finally spat. "That wild creature needs put down before she hurts decent folks. The only animals I see Grant Callahan shot back his voice like iron are the ones who came riding in here with torches. Now get off my land, don't come back." Troy jerked his reins, rage twisting his face. "You've chosen the wrong side, Callahan. When the town hears you're sheltering a thief, the town can go straight to hell." Grant cut him off cold. "And so can you." "Luke," he said without raising his voice, "if any of these men are still standing here in 60 seconds, shoot 'em." With pleasure, Boss Luke Harlow replied, his rifle steady. The raiders spun their horses, cursing as they wheeled into the darkness. Troy's voice echoed back, venom dripping with every word. "This ain't finished. You'll see what happens to wild things, and to those who protect them." Dust and sparks from their torches vanished into the pre-dawn black, leaving the yard silent, but for the pounding of hearts. Luke finally lowered his rifle. "Well," he muttered, "that was one hell of a way to greet the morning." Ruby Dalton sank onto the porch steps, her hands trembling now that the danger had passed. Grant sat beside her, careful to leave space. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I should go," Ruby whispered, her voice hollow. "They'll be back with more. People will die because of me." "People will get hurt," Grant corrected gently, Because Troy Maddox is a coward who hides behind a mob. That's not on you." "He's right," Luke said, surprising them both. "I've known Troy since he was knee-high. Trouble was bred into him. If it hadn't been tonight, it would have been something else." Diego Cortez gave a solemn nod. "In my country we say, el que corre con lobos aprende a aullar. He who runs with wolves learns to howl. Those men-wolves. But here we are, the pack that protects its own. Besides, Owen," Briggs piped up, trying for bravado. "Did you see their faces when Miss Ruby threw that knife, thought Jenkins was gonna wet himself?" Despite herself, Ruby gave a small, shaky smile. "You'd all risk your lives for me. You barely know me." "Know enough," Luke gruffed. "You pull your weight, don't gripe, and you've got sand. That's all that matters." "This is my fault," Ruby protested, surging to her feet. "I brought this to your door." "No." Grant's tone was sharp as a gunshot. "Troy Maddox brought the trouble. All you did was refuse to bow down. There's no shame in that." He stood addressing them all. "We prepare. They'll come back likely with more men. Luke takes stock of our ammunition. Diego ride to the Ironwood Ranch. Ben Harlow owes me a favor. See if he'll lend hands. Owen start filling barrels. If they try burning us out, we'll need water ready." Ruby lifted her chin, and me, Grant, met her gaze. "You've got the keenest eyes. Take the field glasses up on the roof. Watch for dust or riders. First sign of trouble. You ring that bell till it shakes the rafters." As the others moved out, Ruby caught his arm. Why, she asked, her voice raw. Why stand against half the territory for someone like me? Grant studied her for a long beat before answering. "Because I've seen what happens when good men stand by and do nothing. Because you deserve a chance at freedom like anyone else. And because," his voice dropped, "because when you stood your ground, out there fierce as fire, it reminded me some things are still worth fighting for." Her amber eyes searched his face. "I'm not worth dying for Grant. That ain't your choice to make," he said simply. "Now get up on that roof. Sun'll be up soon and we need those eyes watching." As Ruby climbed to her post, Grant felt a grim satisfaction. Troy Maddox had expected easy prey, a lone woman, to bully. Instead, he'd found a family forged by hardship, ready to stand shoulder to shoulder. The sun broke over the desert, painting the land in red and gold. From the roof, Ruby scanned the horizon, field glasses steady. Below, the men of Ironwood Ranch readied for war. She had spent years running, hiding, surviving alone. But now, for the first time, she had something worth defending, and people willing to defend it with her. "I won't be anyone's prize," she whispered, echoing her vow. And as she watched Grant directing the defense, she added silently, "But maybe I could be someone's partner." The hours dragged heavy with waiting. Every dust cloud raised hearts. Every rustle sounded like an enemy. But Ruby felt something she'd never known before. Not just fear, determination. Let them come. She was done running. She was home. 3 days later, Willow Creek's biggest barn was crammed to the rafters. Word of the standoff had spread like wildfire. Ranchers, townsfolk, and drifters alike gathered to witness what folks had already dubbed the Wild Girl Trial. Grant Callahan stepped into the barn with Ruby Dalton at his side, and the place erupted in murmurs. She wore a plain but well-kept dress borrowed from Luke Harlow's late daughter's trunk, the first time she'd worn something that actually fit. Still, her bearing was fierce. Chin-lifted defiance burning in her amber eyes, despite the stares that branded her an outcast. "There she is, a woman," hissed, the creature terrorizing decent folk. Judge Silas Carr, the traveling magistrate known for fairness but little patience, slammed his gavel on the makeshift bench. "Order. This is a court, not a lynch mob." At the front, stood Troy Maddox, his brother Barrett Kane, hulking beside him, still raw from the humiliation at the auction. "Your Honor," Troy began smoothly, "we're here about a danger in our midst. This woman's confessed to years of thieving assault, living like an outlaw. She's a menace to good people. She's a human being," Grant cut in his voice, carrying through the barn like a rifle crack. "Not an element. Not a creature human." Judge Carr peered over his spectacles. "And you are Grant Callahan. I own the Ironwood Ranch where Miss Ruby Dalton is lawfully employed." "Employed," Troy sneered. "Or enslaved. You bought her like stock at auction." "I paid the price this town demanded," Grant said evenly. "But she's free to walk any time she chooses." "Can Morrison say the same for the women upstairs in his saloon?" A ripple of unease ran through the crowd at the jab. Troy's face turned scarlet. "Your Honor, Harvey Tate." The merchant stood. "I've lost goods over the years, flour, preserves, blankets. If she's to blame, I took food when I was starving," Ruby said suddenly, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "Blankets when I was freezing. I did what I had to do to stay alive. If that makes me a criminal, then arrest me. But ask yourselves what drives a 13-year-old girl to the canyons instead of to her neighbors." "Because you're wild," someone shouted. Untamed, dangerous Ruby laughed bitterly. "Dangerous, I lived 7 years out there and never killed anyone. Never harmed a soul that didn't try to harm me first. Can every man in this room say the same?" The judge raised his hand. "Miss Dalton, state your full name." "Ruby Dalton. My folks, Italian immigrants, were murdered by Comancheros when I was 12. I survived capture slavery and 7 years alone in the desert. If that makes me wild, then I'll own it." A voice rang out unexpectedly. Martha Finch, widow of a rancher who had sent men to help Grant, rose to her feet. "I knew the Dalton family. Good people. Their daughter vanished after the raid. We thought she was dead." "I wasn't," Ruby said quietly. "I ran. Because the alternative was worse than dying." Judge Carr swept his gaze across the crowd. "So what are the charges here? Surviving living outside your fences, theft," Troy barked. "Assault. She attacked men trying to bring her in. Men who tried to drag me like an animal," Ruby shot back. "Who talked about breaking me, taming me, using me like property. Yes, I fought them, and I'll fight any man who tries again. She threatened my men just days ago," Troy pressed. "After you rode 15 armed into my yard at dawn," Grant snapped. "Making threats against a woman under my roof. If that's not assault, I don't know what is." "Enough." Judge Carr thundered his gavel, slamming down. "I've seen this before across these territories. Communities quick to condemn those who don't fit their neat box of civilized." He fixed Ruby with a sharp look. "Young woman, do you intend harm to this town?" "No, Your Honor. I want to work, to live free, to be left in peace. And the thefts I'll repay every cent," Ruby answered firmly. "Mr. Tate, make your list. I'll work it off with interest." "Your Honor." Troy started. "I've heard enough from you," Judge Carr cut him off, eyes narrowing. "Why are you so invested in this matter? What is Miss Dalton to you besides a bruise to your pride?" Troy stammered. She's dangerous to you, perhaps," Carr said sharply. "But to this community I see no proof. What I see is a young woman who survived the unspeakable and still stands tall. Instead of honoring her strength, you'd punish her for it. The law someone began. The law, Carr thundered, recognizes self-defense. It recognizes necessity. And it does not condone mobs or the treating of humans as chattel." He turned back to Ruby. "Do you deny taking supplies?" "No, sir. I took what I needed. Then here is my ruling. You'll repay what was taken. Grant Callahan will stand guarantor for the debt." "Yes, Your Honor," Grant answered without hesitation. "As for any crimes committed while she was a child running from unlawful captivity, dismissed, and defending herself against unlawful capture, no crime. This is outrageous," Troy roared. "What's outrageous?" Carr shot back, steel in his voice, as grown men hunting a broken girl like game. What's outrageous is a town that would rather condemn her than face why she had to hide in the first place. He rose to his feet. Ruby Dalton is a free citizen of this territory, entitled to the law's full protection. Any man who harasses or harms her will answer to me. And if I hear of you, Mr. Maddox, raising another mob, you'll find yourself the one standing trial. If she must be punished, then punish me, Grant suddenly declared, stepping forward. I brought her here. I'll bear her debts, her past, whatever weight she carries. Grant, no, Ruby whispered, stunned. Yes, he said, voice firm. You want someone to blame, blame me. But know this, Ruby Dalton is under my protection. Any man who comes for her comes through me first. The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Even Troy had no words. Judge Carr studied Grant a moment, then gave a nod. Noble sentiment, Callahan. But unnecessary. She stands on her own. The gavel cracked. This matter is settled. Court dismissed. As the crowd spilled out, buzzing with talk, Martha Finch approached Ruby. Your mother would be proud, Martha Finch said softly, pressing something into Ruby Dalton's hand before slipping away. It was a small silver cross, worn smooth with years of love. Ruby's breath caught. That was hers, she whispered, tears finally spilling. She never took it off. Grant Callahan guided her out into the street, away from the muttering and glares. Waiting with the horses were Luke Harlow, Diego Cortez, and Owen Briggs, who had stood guard through the hearing. How'd it go, boss? Luke asked. Justice won for once, Grant said. Let's ride home. As they mounted up, Ruby eased her horse beside his. What you said in there about standin' for me? I meant every word, Grant replied simply. I don't need protectin', she murmured, though her tone was softer now. I know, he said, meeting her gaze. But sometimes, maybe let me anyhow. Not because you need it, because I need to give it. Ruby considered, then gave a slow nod. Maybe sometimes. They left Willow Creek under a bright sky. From the saloon doorway, Troy Maddox watched hate twisting his face, Barrett Kane at his shoulder. The law had spoken for now. Ruby Dalton walked free. Not caged, not tamed, her own woman. Thank you, she said, as the town shrank behind them. For standing up, for seeing me as a person when all they saw was an animal. You're no animal, Grant told her firmly. You're one of the strongest folks I've ever met. Wild, maybe, but wild things have their own beauty, their own worth. The world'd be poorer without 'em. Ruby smiled, true and warm, and for the first time since she'd been dragged onto that auction block, hope bloomed inside her chest. The road ahead still bristled with danger, Troy Maddox's threats like storm clouds on the horizon. But she was no longer alone. She had a home, people ready to stand for her, and most surprising of all, a man who treated her with respect. Maybe in time, even love. The desert stretched wide, harsh, and beautiful. But it no longer seemed so threatening. She'd faced worse. And now she wouldn't face it alone. The weeks that followed the trial brought an unexpected calm to the Ironwood Ranch. Ruby threw herself into work with renewed purpose, no longer flinching at every sound. Around her neck hung her mother's silver cross catching the sun, a reminder of who she had been before the world tried to break her. On a Thursday afternoon, Ruby was in the kitchen showing Owen Briggs how to season a cast-iron skillet. The boy was hopeless at cooking, but stubborn about learning. Then came the sound of hoofbeats, slow, unhurried, not trying to sneak. Ruby froze knife within easy reach, moving to the window. A lone rider approached on a paint mare. Her breath caught. She knew that straight-backed posture, that way of sitting a saddle. Her hand trembled. "Mother of God," she whispered. "What is it?" Owen asked nervously. "Should I fetch Mr. Callahan?" But Ruby was already moving, throwing open the door and stepping onto the porch. The rider stopped at the gate, as still as stone. Her voice cracked across the yard, uncertain, but aching with hope. "Ruby, is it really you, Eva?" Ruby's voice was barely a breath. Before Owen could react, Ruby vaulted the rail and ran. The rider swung down just as Ruby reached her, and the two women crashed into each other's arms, sobs shaking them both. My little sister Eva Monroe cried into Ruby's hair. "They told me you were dead. All these years I thought you were gone." Grant emerged from the barn at the noise. Luke and Diego came from different directions, guns half raised, until they saw Ruby clinging to the stranger, weeping like none of them had ever seen. They held back. "I thought you died in the raid." Ruby choked. "I saw the house burning. I thought I'm here now." Eva soothed, pulling back to study her sister's face, streaked with tears but alive. "Look at you, my wild Ruby. All grown up." Grant approached carefully. "Miss Ruby." Ruby turned her face lit with joy. "Grant, this is my sister. Ava, she's alive. I thought she was gone." Ava glanced between them, noting the way Ruby leaned unconsciously toward him. "So you're the man who pulled her off that auction block. The whole territory's talking about it." "Grant Callahan, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Your sister's safe here." "Safe." Eva tested the word, then looked at Ruby's face. Really looked. "And happy you're happy, hermanita." Ruby nodded, wiping her eyes. "Come inside, please. Tell me everything. How did you find me? Where have you been?" As they walked toward the house, Eva explained. She had been in town during the raid, working at the general store. By the time she returned, the farm was ash, and her family gone. "I searched everywhere for you," Eva Monroe said, her hands trembling as she clutched Ruby Dalton's. "The army, the marshals, everyone told me you'd been dragged south, sold in Mexico. They said if you were still alive, I'd never find you." Ruby's voice shook as she asked, "How did you survive?" They sat at the kitchen table. Owen Briggs, bless the boy, had already set coffee to boil without needing to be told. Eva's face darkened with old shadows. "An older couple, the Wheelers, took me in. They were kind enough, but—" She hesitated, then forced the truth out. "Mr. Wheeler's nephew had other ideas about charity. I married him to stop worse things from happening. It wasn't a good marriage." Ruby's hand covered her sister's across the table. "Is he gone?" "Cholera took him 2 years back," Eva said flatly. "Since then, I've worked as a seamstress in Silver City. Saved every dime. Kept asking if anyone had heard of a wild girl in the canyons. Then word came of a trial of a Ruby Dalton, who'd survived 7 years alone. I came as fast as I could." Ruby lowered her gaze, shame coloring her words. "I hid like an animal. I should have searched for you. I should have—" "You survived." Eva cut her off, firm and unyielding. "That's what matters. My brave, wild little sister always rescuing birds, refusing to see anything in a cage. Of course you ran to the wilderness. Of course you survived." Grant Callahan, who had been lingering at the edge of the room, rose as if to excuse himself. But Ruby reached out, catching his arm. "Stay," she said softly. "Your family, too." The word hung heavy in the air, fragile and sacred. Grant sat again, and though his eyes glistened suspiciously, no one dared to mention it. Hours passed as the sisters pieced together their lost years. Ava wept as Ruby haltingly spoke of capture and escape. Ruby cried again, hearing of Ava's loveless marriage and lonely life. "I've been staying at the boarding house in town," Ava admitted at last. "But I hoped. If there's work here, there's always work at a ranch," Grant said quickly. You're welcome here as long as you like. Ruby's look of gratitude nearly made Luke Harlow drop the tray of plates he'd carried in for supper. He had never once seen his boss blush. That night, Ruby tapped on Grant's office door. He was bent over the ledger's lamplight spilling across the page. He set down his pen as she stepped inside. "Thank you," she said, "for letting Eva stay for everything." "She's your sister," Grant replied. "Of course she's welcome." His eyes searched her face. "You look different lighter somehow." Ruby turned to the window, gazing at the stars. "I thought I was alone all these years. Thought everyone I loved was gone. But she's alive, Grant. My sister's alive." "Family has a way of finding each other," he said quietly. Ruby turned back. "Is that what we are then? Family?" The question filled the room thick with unspoken possibility. Grant stood and stepped closer, though careful to leave space. "That day at the trial, when I said you were under my protection, I meant it. But it wasn't just about keeping you safe." Then what was it about her voice was soft, uncertain, in a way her defiance never was. He searched for words, the man who had locked his heart tight after too much loss. "You asked me once what I saw in you at the auction. I saw someone who refused to break, someone who understood what it means to be alone, even in a crowd. Someone who might—" He faltered. Ruby closed the distance, laying her hand over his heart. "Someone who might ride straight into your heart. You already have," he admitted, covering her hand with his. "But Ruby, I won't cage you. I won't ever ask you to be anything but yourself. What if what I am is yours?" she whispered. "Not owned, not tamed, yours by choice." Instead of answering, Grant bent and kissed her. It was gentle questioning. Ruby rose on her toes, answering with a fierceness that spoke of trust hard-won and freely given. When they parted, breathless, Ruby smiled. "I should go. Eva's waiting, and we've got years to catch up," Ruby Grant said as she reached the door. "I love you. Should have said it sooner, but I love you. Wild, heart-fierce spirit, every part." She paused, framed in the lamplight. "I love you too, Grant Callahan. Took me a while to name it, to see it was different from fear or anger. But it's there, deep as desert roots." After she left, Grant stood at the window watching the sisters walk arm in arm toward the smaller house. He heard Ruby laugh, still rare, but no longer impossible, mingling with Eva's lighter tone. Luke Harlow appeared in the doorway. "Boss, everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Luke. Better than fine." The foreman nearly stumbled at the sight of Grant Callahan's face, truly smiling for the first time in years. "About time," Luke muttered, then said louder. "Want me to move Miss Eva's things into the spare room, if you would," Grant said. Then, with the ghost of a grin, "and tell Diego he wins the bet. Apparently everyone saw it coming before we did, Luke." Harlow chuckled. "Hell, boss, even Owen Briggs saw it. And that boy can't see past his next plate of beans. You and Miss Ruby were the only ones surprised." Outside, Ruby Dalton helped Eva Monroe settle into the little room that had once been nothing more than a storage closet, now hastily turned into a living space. As the sisters prepared for bed, Eva asked softly, "That man, Grant Callahan, you love him, like breathing," Ruby admitted without hesitation. "I fought it for months, thought love meant cages and chains. But he sees me, Eva, not the wild girl, not something to break, just me." Eva hugged her fiercely. "Then you're blessed, pequeña. Real love's rarer than water in this desert." That night, as the ranch finally grew quiet, Ruby lay in her narrow bed, fingertips brushing her lips, where Grant's kiss still lingered. For the first time in 7 long years, she felt safe, not because walls held her in, or because a man claimed to protect her, but because she had chosen this place, these people, this life. She had ridden straight into his heart, yes, but he had walked just as steadily into hers. Tomorrow, she would wake to a world with her sister by her side, her chosen family around her, and a love that asked nothing of her except to be exactly who she was, wild, free, and finally home. Winter came down hard that year, the fiercest blizzard the territory had seen in over a decade. The storm swept in without warning on a moonless December night, catching even the most vigilant unprepared. Grant had been out checking the eastern pastures when the first winds struck snow, slicing sideways across the range like knives. He turned Redemption toward the ranch immediately, but visibility dropped to nothing within minutes. The gelding fought against the drift's hooves, sinking deeper with every step. Back at the Ironwood Ranch, Ruby was the first to sense something was wrong. That instinct that had kept her alive in the wilderness screamed warnings as the wind howled louder. She found Luke in the barn, both of them reaching the same thought at once. "Boss ain't back," Luke said grimly. "The cattle in the east pasture," Ruby began, "are likely freezing already." Luke's weathered face held a flicker of fear. "If we lose that herd, the ranch is done for." Ruby was already moving, grabbing blankets, rope, anything that might help. Eva appeared at the barn door, shawl pulled tight against the gale. "Ruby, no. You can't go out there." "He's out there," Ruby shot back, her voice like iron. "The man who gave me a home when everyone else saw nothing but an animal. I won't leave him to die." "Then I'll go too," Luke started. Ruby shook her head hard. "They need you here. If something happens, the ranch needs your hands. Diego's too old for this weather, and Owen," she didn't finish. They all knew Owen Briggs wasn't ready for this kind of fight. "I'll help," Eva said suddenly. "I can't track like you, but I can work with the herd." Ruby grabbed her sister's shoulders. "Eva, we're Monroe women. We survive, we protect our own. And that man out there is mine, whether I've said the words or not." She pulled her sister into a quick, fierce embrace. "Help Luke. Get hot water ready, blankets by the fire. When I bring Grant back, he'll need doctoring." She swung onto her mare, the same one she'd ridden into town that first day, and plunged into the white wall of the storm. Behind her, Luke was already barking orders to the others, his voice barely carrying over the shrieking wind. Outside, the world was chaos. Snow slashed like broken glass, the wind screaming, as if hell itself had opened. Ruby pulled her hat low and trusted the instincts that had kept her alive for years. She knew every rise and hollow of this land, even blind. She let her horse feel the way the earth's shape, guiding them through the storm. She found the herd first, huddled against a ridge, half buried, already stiffening toward death. No sign of Grant. Ruby's heart pounded, then she spotted it, a dark shape crumpled against the drifts with Redemption standing guard like a sentinel. Ruby's world narrowed to that still form. She fought through the snow and dropped from her saddle, falling to her knees beside him. Grant. He stirred, barely conscious. His lips were blue, a gash bleeding at his temple. "Ruby," he rasped, voice broken by cold. "You shouldn't. Storm. Save your strength," she snapped, checking his body with desperate hands. His ankle was twisted badly, likely broken. "Can you ride if I get you up the herd? I'll handle the herd. First we get you home." With strength born of sheer will, Ruby hauled him upright. He cried out as weight hit his ankle, nearly collapsing, but she forced him onto Redemption's back. "Hold on to the saddle horn. That horse will take you home." "The cattle," he tried again. "I said I'll handle it," she shouted, pressing the reins into his hands. "Trust me, Grant, the way I trusted you." She slapped Redemption's flank, sending the gelding plowing through the storm. Loyal as ever, the horse would carry him back. Now Ruby turned her eyes to the herd. Nearly 60 head Ironwood's survival stood on the edge of death. But Ruby knew how to think like the creatures she had lived among. She fixed on the lead steer an old bull named Caesar, who had weathered many storms. If she could move him, the others would follow. Using her rope and voice, Ruby Dalton drove the old bull Caesar into the gale. He bellowed his protest hooves, digging in, but at last he moved, and the herd followed. It should have been impossible. One woman, even one who'd lived 7 years half wild, shouldn't have been able to push 60 head through a killing blizzard. But Ruby had long ago learned that impossible was just another word for hard, and she'd been facing hard all her life. She became the storm itself, fierce and unyielding, forcing the herd forward step by step. When they balked, she was there. When they turned wrong, she corrected them. Her hands went numb. Her face burned raw, but she kept on. These cattle weren't just stock, they meant survival. They meant Grant Callahan's home would stand another season. Hours bled into eternity. Ruby lost all sense of time, focused only on the next breath, the next shove forward. Her mare staggered beneath her, exhausted yet faithful. And then lights. Faint at first, then brighter. The ranch shining through the snow like salvation. Luke Harlow and Owen Briggs stood with torches blazing Eva Monroe, holding the barn door wide as the cattle lunged toward safety. They surged past Ruby, desperate for shelter. She barely remembered dismounting before Luke's arms caught her as she collapsed. Inside, the heat of the kitchen seared after the cold, her body racked with violent shivers. Grant, she gasped through chattering teeth. Here came his voice. He sat propped by the stove, ankle splinted, head bandaged, eyes fierce. "You magnificent, reckless woman, you saved them all." "Saved us all," Ruby corrected weakly, as Eva stripped off her frozen clothes and wrapped her in blankets. Every head accounted for Luke reported still in disbelief. "Don't know how you managed it. Miss Ruby, shouldn't have been possible." "She rode straight into the storm," Grant said softly, his gaze never leaving her face. "Just like she rode into my heart. Fierce. Fearless. Unstoppable." Even through her exhaustion, Ruby managed a smile. "Told you wild things have their uses." The blizzard raged 2 more days, but Ironwood Ranch stood warm and alive within. Grant's ankle mended clean, the cattle safe. Ruby had proved not only to them, but to herself, that she wasn't just the wild girl who survived alone. She was a woman who would fight to protect what she loved. On the 3rd morning, sunlight broke across a white world, dazzling and pure. Ruby stood on the porch with Grant, who leaned on crutches, both staring at the brilliance. "You could have died," he said quietly. "So could you. Difference is I chose it. You were caught." He turned to her, then steel and tenderness mingling in his eyes. "Marry me." Ruby froze. "I know it's sudden," he went on. "I know you prize freedom above all. But Ruby, when I thought I was dying out there, all I could think was that I'd never told you what you mean to me. Not just to this ranch. To me." His hand, rough and trembling, cupped her face. "Marry me, not to cage you, not to break you, but to stand with you through every storm." Ruby looked at this man who had seen her scars, yet never judged, who had offered her work. Instead of chains, respect. Instead of ownership, who had stood before the town and declared her worth. "I'm not an easy woman to love," she warned. "And I'm not an easy man," he said with a crooked grin. "Maybe that's why we fit." She kissed him. Then snow bright all around the world, remade in light. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, Grant Callahan, I'll marry you. But I'm keeping my knives." He laughed deep and rich. "I'd worry if you didn't." From the doorway came applause. Luke, Diego, Cortez, Owen, and Eva stood grinning. Diego pulled out a bottle of whiskey he'd been hoarding, and Luke declared the day a holiday. That night, as laughter and warmth filled the ranch house, Ruby marveled at how far she'd come from frightened child to wild fugitive, to this moment a woman with family, a home, and a love she had chosen. Any regrets? Grant asked quietly when they found a rare moment alone. Ruby looked at Eva laughing with Owen at Luke, and Diego bickering good-naturedly at the man beside her who had given her hope. None, she said firmly. The trail was hard, but it led me home. Home. Grant echoed, drawing her close. The wind howled outside, but within there was warmth, belonging, and love. The wild girl no man could tame hadn't been broken. She had found where she belonged. Spring would come with fresh trials. Troy Maddox still nursed grudges in town. The ranch would face drought predators and market woes. But Ruby Dalton, soon to be, Ruby Callahan, had weathered worse. And now she wasn't alone. She had people who would stand beside her, come what may. She'd ridden straight into his heart, and together they rode into something even wilder, a future bright with hope, fierce with love, and free as the desert wind. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.